So let's move on to the next session, session 2, the promises of HERA and the upcoming preparatory action. So as a second flagship initiative on AMR, the Pharmaceutical Strategy commits to promote investment and coordinate research, development, manufacturing and deployment and use for novel antibiotics as part of the new EU Health Emergency Response Authority prior to the start of the authority's operations through preparatory actions in 2021. The public consultation this initiative closed on 12th of May 2021, and the legislative proposal is expected in the fourth quarter of this year also. So what will be the focus of these preparatory actions and what can be expected for the future HERA, the EU BARDA, and what lessons can be learned from the US BARDA for the AMR ecosystem? So let's introduce our next speaker. Is Christopher Hutchins. He's the Director Division of CBRN Countermeasures at BARDA. Christopher, thanks for joining us today.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly, and I can see you as well. So the floor is all yours.
Excellent. Great. Good afternoon, and I guess good morning from the US. So thanks a lot for giving me an opportunity to talk a little bit about BARDA and kind of what our mission space is and really what we're doing in the area of antimicrobial resistance. And really, thank you very much for the presentation, Wolfgang. It's really great to see that we have kind of a mind meld across the Atlantic, and that we may eventually have a partner on the other side of the Atlantic to help ensure that that we are together most prepared to respond to emerging events and other health security events. So, what is BARDA? So, we're the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. We're a funding organization. We report to the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, or the ASPR, which is one of the Health and Human Services Assistant Secretaries, who has the mission to really ensure that our nation is prepared to respond to the medical consequences of really any public health emergency due to a health security threat. They could be, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, but really kind of within our mission space, it's the threats that are due to emerging infectious diseases, pandemic influenza, and chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats. So if we go to the next slide. So what we do, BARDA, is supports the ASPR by working with industry and forming public-private partnerships with industry to support the accelerated development of medical countermeasures, drugs, therapeutics, diagnostics, things like that, to ensure that we're prepared to respond to those medical consequences of a public health emergency. We have really flexible funding authorities. We have lots of different contracting authorities that allows us to work in true partnerships with our industry partners, our sponsors. We provide multi-year funding to ensure that there's sustainable funding to see the development of countermeasures from early stage development all the way through licensure, supporting post-marketing commitments, stockpiling, and manufacturing and other activities like that. We're kind of a small agency. We have about 350 employees. Half of us are federal program managers like myself. But the secret sauce to the organization is we bring in subject matter expertise. These are people that have spent, their entire careers in industry developing countermeasures, developing drugs and diagnostics and vaccines. And they bring that expertise to BARDA to allow us to identify the most innovative and impactful technologies, but also once we enter into partnerships with companies, they provide that expertise to the companies so that, they're really getting the companies are getting free consulting advice from subject matter experts who have a lot of experience, who are working across lots of different programs and lots of different contracts, who are engaging on all those contracts with the FDA, and other regulatory authorities. So they really understand kind of what the FDA is thinking, and they're also seeing challenges and opportunities across a broad range of portfolios. We also facilitate partnerships with our other government partners who have interest in development of countermeasures so that we identify opportunities where perhaps another agency, let's say within the Department of Defense, may be interested in working with that company, that sponsor, to conduct some additional activities. So, kind of really bringing in all partners across the government and really looking at promoting innovation, bringing in new types of tools and technologies, having access to our core facilities, our core capabilities like the non-clinical development network, a clinical studies network, a manufacturing network, access to regulatory quality affairs specialists, things like that, to really drive innovation when it comes to medical countermeasure development. Next slide, please. So just go back real quick. One slide. Yeah, just a quick snapshot. We don't work in a vacuum. We work with lots of federal partners within the U.S. government, whether it's a range of partners in the Department of Defense, with all of our health and human services brethren, but also other organizations and agencies that one may not really consider at first blush to be involved in the medical countermeasure space, like NASA, for example, which obviously has a lot of interest in the effects of radiation exposure for their astronauts. So we work very closely with a range of partners to really accelerate and really get medical countermeasures made available to the public. Next slide. But really, this is my Fruit Loop slide. This just really shows all the different industry partners that we've worked with over the 16, 17 years that BARDA has been in existence. We've worked with over 400 different industry partners, large pharmaceutical companies, small biotech companies, anything in between, companies here in the US, companies outside of the US, all throughout the world. It doesn't matter. You got a great idea for a new medical countermeasure that has potential to achieve impact. We're going to work with you. Next slide, please. We've been really successful over the past 17 years. We have supported the development and eventual FDA approval, licensure, or clearance of 61 medical countermeasures. So this slide was current as of Monday. So since then, we've had another approval for a product called Stratigraft. It's a product, a medical countermeasure, skin substitute for burn victims. But really, it shows over the last 17 years that we've been really successful in driving the development and eventual approval or licensure or clearance of lots of different medical countermeasures addressing pandemic influenza, emerging infectious diseases, and CBRN threats, whether it's smallpox, anthrax, Ebola, and most importantly for us and for the conversation today, antimicrobial resistance. We've overseen and been part of the approval of 3 products, 3 new novel antibiotics in the past several years to address the issue of AMR. So we put together a pretty successful model here, and one that we continue to deploy for lots of different areas. Next slide. I don't really have to emphasize the issue of AMR. It's responsible for over 700 deaths around the world every year. By 2050, we're anticipating those deaths could rise to 10 million, really costing upwards of $100 trillion total across the board in terms of lost revenue, in terms of impact on lots of different societal areas. The problem is we're just not developing drugs fast enough to keep pace with the rising rate of resistance. And it's really complicating our ability to really perform any of the common medical procedures that we take for granted today. So we got to have new antibacterials. We can't just try to catch up. We got to stay in front of the issue. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see the impact on morbidity, mortality, and costs really having a dramatic increase across the globe. It is a public health emergency. So the strategy of the bacterial MCM program, which sits within my division, is really to reduce morbidity and mortality caused by drug-resistant infections, and allows us to respond to any public health emergency or mass casualty event in which drug-resistant bacteria complicates our ability to respond. The way we do this is we work with industry, we form partnerships with industry, and we really reduce barriers to innovation. We provide funding, access to subject matter expertise to really drive development and accelerate the approval and deployment of these medical countermeasures, and eventually stockpiling into our stockpile so that we have these available in the event of an event. Our priorities are developing new antimicrobials, with a focus on oral, but also IV antimicrobials, new mechanisms of action, addressing drug-resistant bacterial infections that are really addressing the most serious or urgent drug-resistant bacterial infections that are driving a majority of hospital and community-acquired infections. developing these products to address biothreat indications, and really just making sure that we have a very robust armamentarium to respond to any CBRN event in which drug-resistant bacterial infections could either be the primary or the secondary cause of morbidity or mortality. Next slide.
1 minute, Chris. One minute, okay? Thank you.
Great. Long story short, we provide support in early stage development through CARB-X, advanced research and development, and Project BioShield for stockpiling. Next slide. CARB-X, as you know, it's a global public-private partnership, lots of partners. That's really is driving innovation in the preclinical space. Next slide. We've had 92 projects that we've supported over the past 5 years. We provided $300 million in investments. That's been matched by $2 billion of follow-on investment. Lots of successes, 8 graduates, 9 first-in-human studies, lots of different successes here. Next slide. We have 14 current projects in our advanced research and development portfolio. As you can see here, developing antibiotics against a range of threats. Next slide. Project BioShield is the mechanism that allows us to procure products for the Strategic National Stockpile and support post-marketing commitments. Our first one was to the company Paratech for the product Nuzyra. Next slide. And it really has a transformational impact by providing that funding that companies need to, once a product is launched, to ensure that the company stays sustainable for that period of time before it's really starting to start generating revenue. Next slide. So over the past 10 years, many partnerships, over $1.5 billion invested, over 28 candidates that we've supported, 3 product approvals, addressing the majority of threats of drug-resistant organisms. And really, we're going to continue to work in this area and drive innovation and continue to support this area. Next slide. And with that, I will turn it over back to you. Sorry that I was a little bit longer than I anticipated, but thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Chris, thanks. I wish I could have given you more time as well. I was trying to stay on time and get a couple of questions in from the audience as well. Impressive figures, frankly, and congratulations on the Joel, which continues to be well done and is an outstanding example for Europe to, as you say, create a partner which you can work closely with as well. And so let's go to our next speaker, which is Mark E. Jones. He's a Beam Alliance board member, and he's also the head of preclinical development and head of development project management of Basilia Pharmaceutica as well. Mark, you there? I can see you on screen. Excellent. Mark, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then we're going to do some questions with the audience as well,
Absolutely,
just to keep it on track.
So thank you, Brian. I think you hear me loud and clear. And thank you, Wolfgang and Chris, for your insightful overviews of HERA, the EU BARDA, as you've referred to it there, and of course the mature organization at BARDA presented by Chris. And we thought what would be a good way to segue for some discussion and questions, particularly around the potential, the exciting potential of HERA, is just to take a look at the experience from a BARDA contractor. So in that sense, I'm Mark, as Chris has, as Brian has says, from Basilea, and we're a BARDA contractor, but I think it's not so much about Basilea, rather it's about we're a small, medium enterprise, typical of any of the 69 Beam Alliance members. And it's a statement, it's not a, it's a fact that accessing funding to offset the prohibitive development costs, in here I'm talking about phase 1 through the pivotal phase 3 studies, is probably the single biggest and most challenging hurdle to get a drug approved. And in the end, what we're talking about is getting a drug approved. That's the end goal that we should all stay focused on. Now, Arjan van Hengel has referred to this in the earlier presentation, I think very nicely, as this valley of death. And that's the point where the hurdle is insurmountable unless we can access external funding. We can talk from an experience here because there is, of course, experience in so-called push incentives. No one right now can talk from their experience of a pull incentive, really significant pull incentives, because as we've heard from previous speakers, they're not yet there. So if I go on to the next slide. Yes, it's a little bit slow, so bear with me, the transition to slides. So the fact is that external funding allows a company like Basilea to invest in antibiotic research and development. And without it, resources would be plowed into other therapeutic areas. That's the issue we're all focused on. Basilea, typical, we have two portfolios, an oncology and an antibiotic R&D. What is the incentive to invest in the antibiotic portfolio when we can simply have a better return on investment by far in the oncology portfolio? This is what we're trying to change to re-incentivize this. So I think the discussions there, the presentation from Chris from BARDA, are particularly insightful. Basilea, BARDA, as you heard from Chris, has funded 28 different antibiotic candidates, 3 approvals, Babamir, Zemdri, Xerava. That's 3 approved new novel antibiotics on the marketplace. That's the goal. And it's always interesting when I hear the numbers, 1.5 billion US dollars. Actually, this is peanuts. And it always amazes me of the challenges to find such a relatively small amount of money to solve such a fundamentally important issue to effectively human society. And the $1.5 billion, coincidentally, we've also seen on several other slides, that's the cost just in Europe per year estimated of antimicrobial resistance, not to mention the costs globally. Basilea is funded by BARDA with the phase 3 program for ceftobiprole, and we saw that fitting one of those unmet medical needs on the slide that Arjan presented in terms of MRSA, in this case for Staph aureus bacteremia. But what is it about the BARDA funding that we are fortunate enough to access that has really made a difference? Chris alluded to this before, and I've just very easily summarized this in 3 buckets: the people. So I'm repeating a little bit what Chris says. He described that as the sauce, the hot sauce, the sauce that makes it really tasty, makes it different. Dedicated. So there's a group of people dedicated to the, if we go back to, I didn't touch anything there. So if you go back one more, please. There's a group of people dedicated to antibiotics. That makes a difference. This is their job. And as Chris has alluded to, they are experts in toxicology, DMPK, pharmacology, clinical research, clinical operations, quality, CMC, API, drug product. They're true experts, but expertise does not get you very far unless you have experience. And from our experience, the BARDA staff that partner with us on sometimes, certainly a weekly, sometimes daily point of view, have 10 years or so in experience, former senior people, former FDA reviewers, 10 years experience in developing drugs. So they absolutely know what they're talking about. And I think the other thing worth pulling out is it's a common goal. The entire organization is focused on the approval. Nothing in between. It's getting to the approval. That's the goal. The second bucket I'd focus on now, and it should pull up the next bullet. Yes, there it is I've called it the product, which for the small medium enterprise, for the BEAM members, our 69 members who are bravely trying to develop antibacterials, it's non-dilutive funding. And you really cannot get much better than that. But the non-dilutive funding is also milestone driven. And that's really important. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's always pushing for the next step. We have to achieve the next step to get the next tranche of funding. And that's done in a cost share basis. And a cost share, remember, if the small medium enterprise, the small pharma company who we know are really driving the innovation today, not big pharma, 10% of a 50 million phase 3 study is an enormous amount of money for a loss-making biotech or a small pharma. So that shared risk drives us all in the same direction to most efficiently develop the drug. And the third bucket I'll pull out is the process, as I've called it. The contractual relationship, it's a two-party contract. There is no consortium. There are no other external stakeholders to complicate that. The pharma contractor that owns that asset, that knows best how to develop the drug, has that responsibility and control within the bounds of a detailed statement of work, which is in the contract. Every spend requires BARDA approval. It's a hurdle, but it works out to be the best way to develop a drug. We have to be responsible for spending effectively public money, and we have to demonstrate value to the US government. Multiple bids, teasing out the best contractor, may not be the cheapest, but the best. And then that oversight. Altogether, the expertise from BARDA, the expertise that companies have, provide strong cross-functional expert team. And I repeat, laser focused on that ultimate goal to get a drug approved. For the case of BARDA contracting, clearly the focus is the FDA, but those data sets can be applied to other health authority jurisdictions. So in summary, on that last bullet, I think what we have here for HERA, and the BEAM Alliance has really appreciated being part of that consultancy process, not just for the pharmaceutical strategy, but now for HERA. It's really critically important. It's an unprecedented opportunity for us to revitalize this sector, supporting directly the biotechs, the pharmas who are really driving the innovation. And I end up on that goal to get the clinical development phases completed to approval. And I'll end there, and I think a nice segue to allow questions and discussions back to Brian for this incredibly important opportunity that allows to take a little bit of weight off of BARDA's shoulders, I may say, who have taken the lion's share of funding for more than 10 years now. It's really time for Europe to play its role. And I think we hear the positive noises. We need now to set that into concrete, effective action. Thank you, Brian.